Okay, thanks, Nathan. I'll keep this brief. I stress I'm not an expert in deer management myself, but recognise it's an important issue. So on behalf of Wester Ross Biosphere, I'd like to welcome you all to this conference and thank you for participating. Also, our thanks go to Highland Environment Forum for organising the event. Just like to say, the UNESCO Man in the Biosphere programme across the globe celebrates the relationship between people and place and seeks to promote sustainable management of the natural environment for the benefit of the communities that live there. As such, Westeros Biosphere seeks to bring people together to develop and promote practical solutions to issues of sustainability and land use. Today's topic is a really important issue across Scotland in relation to sustainable land use and cultural values, but also in terms of global climate action. While today we're focused upon deer management, it does not sit in isolation, with domestic grazing, woodland management, a range of other land use issues, all combining to contribute to the whole picture. Hence, we hope that this will herald the start of a bigger conversation about the management of our uplands, moorland and woodlands, and that everyone who has an interest in the subject will join in that conversation with a positive and respectful attitude to embrace each other's perspectives in order to find sustainable and practical ways forward. That's all I really want to say. Welcome to the event. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you participate fully. And I hope you enjoy the presentations and the discussions and look forward to working with you as we move forward towards a more sustainable future. Thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Iain. Okay, well, we'll get rolling straight away. Our first speaker is Sinclair Coghill from NatureScot, so I'd like to invite him at this time.
Thanks very much, Nathan. I'll attempt to share a screen with you all, so bear with me for a moment. Right. Right, have you all got that in front of you?
Yes, that's coming through, Sinclair.
That's great. Thanks very much, Nathan. I'll just go through these. Apologies for death by PowerPoint, but we'll work through it and it'll help me if not you. So, hi, I'm Sinclair Coghill, Wildlife Management Officer with NatureScot, working in South Highland. So thanks for the opportunity to talk with you all today. Just wanted to provide a little context of where we are today in the terms of legislation and our policy. So going back a long time, our first deer legislation was the Deer Act in 1959, which provided seasons and some protection for agriculture and forestry. The next legislation, and what we're still working with today, is the Deer Scotland Act 1996, although this too has been amended by subsequent legislation and now includes deer welfare, public safety, and I can't see some of my notes because there's something in the way, but and I can't move that. Anyway, and public interests of the economic and social and environmental nature. Sorry, folks. Sitting beneath that, outside of legislation, is the Scotland's Wild Deer, a national approach. So it's basically the Scottish deer strategy. It's called WDNA for short. Apologies for the acronyms. It was developed by land managers and deer managers, government and others, and was launched by the Scottish Government in November 2008. It sets out what is meant by sustainable deer management. This is not just a view of NatureScot, but it's been developed by the deer sector as well. And it covers economic, environmental and social objectives and animal welfare. So it's a bottom-up approach and provides NatureScot with context for national planning frameworks. business planning, should I say. So next step down, or in more detail, is the Deer Code, or the Code of Practice on Deer Management, to give it its full title. This was published in 2012, and it applies to all land managers who own land where deer occur. It highlights a responsibility to manage deer sustainably, and it sets out what you must do to avoid prosecution, what you should do to avoid regulation, and what you could do as good practice. Apologies for the movement to the slides there. The next step down is Wild Deer Best Practice Guides. This is a suite of really good practical guides developed by the industry. It's the herbivore impact assessment ones that are on your screen at the moment, but it's part of a whole range of guides, from species recognition through culling, appropriate shots, lardering and butchering, right the way through to this herbivore impact assessment. So it's really highly regarded internationally, and it is the go-to guide for land managers for appropriate management. So looking at deer management today, deer management is still run on a voluntary basis. So in the Highland context, that's mostly local deer management groups. Most of NatureScot's input is the provision of advice and developing a partnership approach with these groups. I'd like to think of us as a critical friend. I'm not sure everybody views us as in that way, but I prefer to think of it that way, and I'll stick to that. So since 2014-15, we've been supporting most deer management groups in developing deer management plans, which set how they are managing the land and the herbivores and in the public, as well as for their own private interests. So we've audited the performance of deer management groups and their plans across 101 elements of quality criteria, and we fed this back to both them and to government. In terms of regulation, we have our authorisations process to enable managers to meet their objectives through culling out of season or at night. In some areas where performance has been below the standards expected, we have taken regulatory action, such as Section 6 for requiring a deer management plan to be produced where one is absent or inadequate. Section 7, which is directing management through voluntary agreements. Section 10, and emergency measures, and that's commonly for public safety. You know, the deer are crossing the road and need controlled. We've not yet used Section 8, which is directing action on a more statutory basis. That still remains in the legislation. Our current challenges are climate change, biodiversity loss, and the green recovery. So in climate change, the changes to deer and their behaviour, land use and management changes to battle the climate change, clear need for more woodland and peatland repair, and on biodiversity, managing deer impacts on other plants and species. The green recovery, that's kind of a term that's appeared since COVID-19 hit us. Not everybody's quite sure what that means, but for deer managers, I would argue that that means much more of the same. So it's managing deer impacts locally to deliver the outcomes that we all need. So NatureScot will support the delivery of these via some of our priorities. So NatureScot will and is accelerating peatland restoration through our Peatland Action Programme and in collaboration with others. NatureScot will invest in action to reverse biodiversity loss. NatureScot will make the case for and support step change in the use of nature-based solutions to climate change and other problems. NatureScot will help the Scottish Government and land managers to transform the use of land and sea so it contributes even more to the future wellbeing economy. And NatureScot will champion the role of nature in transforming places where people live. So what's next? That's a photograph of my well-thumbed copy of the Deer Working Group report. That was delivered to government in December 2019. It seems a very, very long time ago now. It's a very weighty tome, 374 pages, with 99 recommendations within that. So Scottish Government have been well through this and have considered all the recommendations and have accepted 92 of the 99 recommendations. We are working through these at present and have sized up the task. And fortunately, the Scottish Government have provided us with some additional resources to deliver. Excuse me. So you can expect some job adverts appearing in environment jobs soon. And we know that Deer is within the Scottish Government programme for government. So taking it forward, we are in the midst of revising the wild deer strategy, and we're building on the new action plan. Sorry, dear, we're building on a new action plan with the public, private, and third sectors. We've identified the changes required in legislation and the need for meaningful consultation, and we're building our own capacity to fulfil the greater ask. So there's recognition there that there is change ahead. Some deer management groups are looking beyond traditional deer management, and there's certainly close scrutiny of the Deer Working Group recommendations and how that's going to impact upon managers and their management. We're looking at more integrated land management groups, the use of innovative technology is increasingly, such as we're starting to use or trial the use of drones for counting rather than helicopters. In support of this, NatureScot's shared approach to wildlife management and continued shared and deer wildlife management and collaborative working with all partners. Okay, I think that was me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sinclair. Yeah, we can stop sharing your screen now.
Yeah, I'm making my way there. Right, gotcha.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah, back to normal. Thanks very much.
So yeah, we've got a bit of time for some questions and some discussion now. So I think the first one there was from Duncan asking why NatureScot have not used Section 8. We've had ministerial instruction to use the suite of powers to reduce deer numbers when this was agreed by NatureScot's board.
Well, what we're currently trying to do is what we always do is to use the least amount of legislation required to do a job. So where we can provide advice and people will take up that advice, then that's what we'll do, and we escalate through the steps. So using authorizations is one mechanism to enable control to be taken. Stepping up, we might move to Section 6 to require a deer management plan where the existing plans are inadequate or not there. Section 7, it would be using a voluntary agreement, and to date, that's as much as we've needed to use. There is a kind of resource implication as well. You don't launch into any legislative action without the requisite resource there to back that up. So no use diving in. So that's part of the reason I think that our resource levels are going up to enable us to take further regulatory action should that be required.
Okay, thank you, Sinclair. The next question was, sorry, Duncan, did you want to come in on that point? I know it was your question, so.
Yeah, I was just going to come in. I mean, I think the NatureScot have had successive warnings from Scottish Government that the voluntary approach simply isn't working and stronger action is required. I mean, looking back in 2010, when NatureScot took over responsibility for deer management from the Deer Commission, the outgoing chair of the Deer Commission says the current voluntary system has not evolved much in the last 20 years. If opportunities for reform are not taken, then other approaches will need to be considered. And prior to that, the Deer Commission itself suggested statutory measures would be required. So, you know, I think part of the problem we've got here is that the voluntary system simply isn't working, and that is recognised by the Deer Working Group report itself. So I take what Sinclair is saying, but, you know, the instruction is that NatureScot needs to use the full range of its powers to reduce deer populations. And what I heard there was some ignoring of that instruction.
I don't think that's the case at all. The Deer Working Group report has been delivered to government. The Scottish Government has accepted most of those recommendations, and we are working through those with government and with the sector to deliver on those 99 or those 92 of the 99 recommendations. So yeah, looking from the outside, it seems to be taking a long time, but certainly that's in train, and the resources are being put in place to enable some of that work to be taken forward.
Okay, the next question was from David Tillich, and that is, in regards to peatland restoration and carbon capture models, are NatureScot behind this and willing to issue licenses to allow more extensive control on these properties?
So for peatland restoration, we tend to look at deer densities that are on the properties and make a judgment as to whether the impacts of the deer densities on that property are likely to be an issue. So we wouldn't be offering peatland restoration where we thought that the habitat would go backwards. I'm not sure quite what the question was driving at there.
David, did you want to come in to elaborate?
Yeah, what it is the NatureScot require boundaries for applying for licenses on if we've got open moorland where we're doing peatland restoration and stuff, we wouldn't get the relevant licenses on that property to if we have got high density numbers. I've tried applying for them before and been refused on open peat ground. As a head stalker on a peatland restoration project and carbon capture project, more landowners are going to be doing that kind of thing in the future. Will these licenses be extended for or be granted in future for open hill ground and things like that where peatland restoration is being performed?
Yeah, so out-of-season authorisations are available for open land for the natural heritage. So that is something that's within the legislation already. So, you know, I'm happy to talk to you offline about your particular circumstance, but you know, the legislation's there to do that.
It's just with being refused in the past for certain licenses, even though we've got a high density deer area. We got refused on an open hill ground because there wasn't a physical boundary, was one of the reasons. But I'm quite willing to speak offline in regards to that, or speak to the ops team in regards to that anyway.
Sure. Yep. No, that's helpful. Yeah, I can't comment on your particular circumstance because I don't know what it is.
Okay, thank you. I noticed Drew was waving his hand in his camera there. Was there something you wanted to come in on here, Drew?
Yeah, just on that issue in the Monadhliath, we had to complete our planned hindcull before we were able to apply for peatland restoration funds. So reducing the number of years an important component before we could get hands on those funds to deal with problems in special areas of conservation.
Okay, thank you. The next questions are about RSPB's management. I'm going to leave those until we come to Duncan's presentation at the end. It seems like a more appropriate place to discuss those questions. And the next one was, is there a timeline for the new deer strategy to be launched?
I'm sure there is. I don't know what it is, though. My apologies for not being briefed at that.
Okay, no problem. If there's no more questions on this, then I suggest we move on to the next presentation, which is Iain Fergusson and Tom Cameron from Forestry and Land Scotland.
Good morning, guys. Thank you very much. This is going to be a joint presentation between Tom and myself. I'll sort of start it off by sort of giving a national picture in regards to deer management for Scotland, obviously covering the whole of Scotland. Then Tom will follow that up with what's specific to the North region up in the Highlands. Hopefully that's okay with you. I'm going to try my technology and share the screen and hope this works. And you can advise me if it is showing okay. Is that coming up, guys?
Yeah, it's not the presentation mode though. That's
right,
showing it.
Yeah, let's see if we can go into slide from beginning. Bear with me,
yeah, there we go.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much and all that with it. So as I say, this is a joint presentation between Tom and myself coming in there. So just a wee bit of background to Forestry and Land Scotland in regards to our current situation. We manage approximately 630,000 hectares of land on behalf of the people of Scotland. So it's 9% of Scotland's land holding. Of that, about 470,000 of it is forests. The land that we manage comes from really rural areas, you know, right up in the north, down the west, even down into the south of Scotland, and there to very urban areas around the central belt, to actually woodlands right in the middle of Glasgow, you know, and up in the fringes of Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee. So we've got quite a big mix of the types of land and all that we look to use when we're doing this. Deer control obviously plays a big part in what we're doing here, and we have got the 4 deer species that is actually on our land in Scotland: the red roe, sika and fallow. Obviously, in certain parts of the country, there are higher densities in certain species than in others, but we do look to manage all deer species when we talk about our deer management, rather than just look at single sort of deer management species as we go there. We use a different 3 different types of controllers to aid us to meet our targets. We've got our own very valuable in-house staff, our own wildlife ranger team, which is approximately around about 60, including wildlife rangers and that. We also use the deer controllers, you know, who are individual contractors who work to exactly the same standards as our own wildlife ranger team, and we also use some recreational stalkers, to aid us and all that as well. The present cull is sort of split roughly around about 30% of the cull is done by our own in-house staff, our own wildlife ranger team, 65% done by deer controllers, and roughly 5% by recreation controllers. We openly look to use all tools that's available to us to help us to achieve our objectives. So we quite openly look to use out of season and night shooting licenses when we can obtain these from Nature Scotland. Again, we see these as invaluable going forward to help us to meet our objectives. Presently, we're sitting this year and looking to achieve a cull around about 36,000. But actually going forward, we'll be looking to increase that even more, and I'll touch on that a wee bit further on in the presentations. Impact levels across the national estate, looking on tree leader browse damage and what we call P1 year crops. So that's a tree that's been planted in the ground for 1 year, looking at the leader damage on that. The average across the country just now is around about 18%. Our target is 10%, so we're above that. Although that figure does fluctuate for certain parts of the country that goes through, but that's the average as it looks to be in there. One of the other tools that we still look to use is we still look to use fencing as part of the process to help protect our forests. However, rather than in the past where fencing has been probably up there, probably second in line to do it, it's fallen further down the agenda a wee bit. And what we're actually saying to our teams, the regional teams now, to say, yeah, we can support fencing on a case-by-case basis, i.e. a business case. Where we have got a legal obligation to carry out deer fencing, then we are committed, we're obliged, we will do that. But where it's not a legal obligation and it's an agreement between a local neighbour or whatever, then we'll be looking for contributions from local neighbours and that in the future going forward when we have these discussions on regards to deer fencing. So the challenges ahead as we go forward. Sinclair talked on this a wee bit. We talk about we've got to contribute to Scotland's climate change and biodiversity targets. So that's an increase in woodland as we go forward. We've the biodiversity targets. We've got some really valuable sites that out there, like the Atlantic rainforest and the West Coast, Caledonian pine forest, to name but a few. Which presently much of these areas are not in very sort of favourable conditions as we go forward. The Deer Working Group has indicated in its report that the deer population, in Scotland has just about doubled in about the last 30 years to around about 1 million, which is that's quite a big concern in that as well. So it shows we've got a lot more work to do there as well. Many of you will be aware as well of the amount of different types of tree diseases that are now starting to come into the country. We've just got to look at larch, we've got phytophthora, we've got pine, we've got red band needle blight, we've got ash dieback, just to name but a few. So going forward, we're actually looking to start to think about planting more alternative species to traditional species that we've planted in the past, like Sinclair spruce, Norway spruce, etc. Now, a lot of these alternative species that we're looking to plant as we go forward are probably going to be more palatable to deer, which means that we need to manage the deer even more than what we're actually doing now if we're looking to get these crops established and get to a mature stage. At any one time within Scotland's National Forest and Land, we've got roughly about 150 million trees that are vulnerable to browsing foot damage. So that is quite an investment, and that's looking at trees that's planted. We plant approximately 25 million trees a year, and up to about year 5, where the leader can get browsed by deer. Obviously, these trees are vulnerable, and obviously, when they're browsed by deer, you start to get a kink in the form of the crop that goes. So we've got a lot we've got to look for to go forward and invest in. So going forward on all that, we talked about how we're going to do it. So we're looking to take an evidence-based approach as we go forward. So what we're looking to do is look at all the information that we've got to help us aid our decision making and saying what is the cull required to actually achieve our objectives within these areas. And what we've put together is this, what we're calling this wildlife management data dashboard. That's just seeing on the screens and all that sort of thing just now. Now, within that dashboard, we're going to show all the results of all the EDU surveys, so actually the deer density surveys that's been carried out, all nearest neighbour surveys, so that's P1 leader browsing damage survey results that were shown, any habitat assessment surveys we've got. We've got neighbour and deer density figures that are taken from NatureScot that shows that deer populations on the boundary where we've got them. We've got all the cull density going back for the last 15 to 20 years. We're going to be adding in here population modelling and that. So we're going to use all this information to help us form our decisions going forward. One of the big aims that we're looking to do with this information and that as well is actually make it public later this year. There's a lot of data in here and we're actually doing some truth checking of it just now. We've actually sent it out to members of the Deer Management Round Table to ask their comments on the layout of it, the way it's set out and that, to get feedback. But the aim is to make this public going forward so that anybody looking at it can actually see the reasons why we're making decisions in certain areas of Scotland and the background behind it. It's part of being open and transparent. Although this is in development still at the moment, it is available where wildlife ranger managers, stroke area wildlife managers have got access to it. And I quite openly say here, without putting Tom on the spot, to any deer management group or anything like that, they'd be happy to do a quick intro or demo to this information that we've got. And anyone that's going to attend the ADMG meeting, I think it's next Wednesday, Willie Lannon's doing a quick introduction into it and that as well, just so people get a flavour of the information that we're looking to use. So going forward, and again, Russell touched on this, Sinclair touched on this going forward. As far as Forestry and Land Scotland, we fully support the Scottish Government's reply to the Deer Working Group report, the 92 recommendations that they've accepted. We are more than happy when requested to do so, work with Scottish Government, work with Nature Scotland, and to aid the delivering of these. One of the areas that we're looking to go forward is actually to look to work more in partnership and collaborative, with neighbours or people with similar interests in what we've got ourselves. We recognise that to be successful in a lot of areas of deer management, we need to start to work at landscape scales. So we really encourage any of the landowners that's out there that would like to get in contact with us to talk about working collaboratively in partnership, to just make that contact with the local teams, start to have dialogue, and let's just start there with an open book to say, how can we work together? Forget what's happened in the past, what can we do, how we can work together, and let's see if we can work to meet common objectives as we start to go forward. We'll continue to use all the legal tools that's available to us, and that includes, if it goes forward, that night vision scopes that are presently being trialled as part of the recommendations with the recommendation of the Deer Working Group report. So we'll see what comes out of that. If it becomes legal, then we will look to use these tools as we go forward as well. We're also open to modern technology, and again, Sinclair touched on this. There's a lot of work going on just now in the use of drones, so it's fixed-wing type drones or smaller ones that's going on. There's a lot of work just now going on there, which I think is really exciting, and it will really help going forward on us to get a better handle, better indication of what's going on the ground. And I think this will develop quite considerably over the next 5 years or so. So what's our target? So we're setting deer density targets in our woodlands somewhere between 2 and 7 deer per kilometre square. We don't know, we haven't got any good relationships yet between deer density and deer impact, and it's something that hopefully through research we can build on to give us greater targets as we go forward. We touched on earlier to say we're looking at tree leader browsing damage to be less than 10%, so we've quite a wee bit to go on there yet. Looking at a lot of our pause sites and high conservation area sites, looking to get them into favourable condition. Many of them are not in that stage at the moment. Some are maybe medium, but some have got some quite high impacts which are associated with deer. We estimate that going forward, we need to increase our culls, and this will become more evident as we get into doing more of this population model and using evidence there, to 40,000 plus annually for the next few years. So we're looking to actually push the deer cull on our land to above that 40,000. Might need to go near 45. We don't know yet, but we might need to look to push that. And it might be actually in some areas that we might actually take zero tolerance of deer in a few of the areas for a couple of years. And by zero tolerance, what I mean is culling deer as we see them within season or within authorisation, i.e. not setting a cull target as such, taking as many as we can, purely to try and reduce the deer populations in these areas following legislation, best practice, down to the level that we need to meet these objectives. And some of these areas, as I touched about earlier, could be things like the Caledonian Pine Woods areas, the Atlantic Rain Woods in Scotland. So that's just a very quick summary, if you like, on a national picture of where we're asking the local teams to start to go and deliver. I'll now hand over to Tom in the North region, who will hopefully start to give you some specifics that's relevant to the north of Scotland. Tom, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Ian. Hi there. So I'm Tom Cameron. I'm the Area Wildlife Manager for North Region. So I oversee the deer management for the whole of the North area. Seeing the map there, that's our land holding. We've got 137,000 hectares of all kind of varying habitat and forestry. We've got a lot of commercial woodland, native woodland, open hill ground. We've got the Afric Hills, peatland restoration, and we've got various types of designated habitat. You can see we go from Skye on the west and right over to the Black Isle and Nairn in the east. So we've got a large range of habitat and forestry. We've got 8 deer larders with the red dots there spread across the country. Spread across the region, sorry, that service our deer cull. We've got a team of 9 wildlife staff. So we've got myself, the Area Wildlife Manager, 2 wildlife ranger managers, 2 deer supervisors, and 4 rangers. And then we have our contract resource, which contribute a significant part of our cull. And we have several partnerships and collaboration projects that we're working on that I'll come to. Next slide, please, Ian.
Oh, sorry, Tom.
Okay.
Yep.
So what I'm going to just to give you a run through what I thought would be easiest to go through the what's, who's, and how's. So from 2016, there you can see this is the region's annual cull. This is all deer included. There's no breakdown of species here. As you can see, we're fairly consistent of around the 7,000 to 8,000 deer per year. Obviously, the past 2 years suffered a bit with COVID. That's definitely had a knock-on effect with restrictions and night shooting and things. So we've had a bit of a knock there. Cull season goes from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So when I produced this data, 2021, so we're in year 2021 at the moment. We had 7,506 deer culled on the 22nd of February when I did this data. I estimated that we would have plus 500 to the end of the year. As of this morning, we're at 8,169. So we've actually shot 660 deer since I produced this data. That's with a fair wind. That's been good weather. Has enabled us to achieve that so far. So we've still got another 15 days or so of the season. So yeah, I'll be looking to be closer to 8,500 deer by the end of this season. So next slide, please, Ian. So the what are we shooting in the region? Again, from 2016 through to this year, you can see that the cull fluctuates, but each year pretty much shooting the same percentage of species. So as you see, roe deer are the smallest contribution, and red and sika are both kind of roughly the same. On each year, fairly consistent. There's a couple of other species in there: goat, feral pig, and fell sheep as well. Okay, so that's the what we're culling. Next slide, please, Ian. So the who. So these are the contributions of who's producing the cull. Contractor, blue bar. As you can see, in our region, they produce about 80% of our cull each year. Our own staff, then they produce say 15% or so, and then there's a mix of, we have NatureScot rangers in collaboration, we have RSPB staff in collaboration, and then we have our deer management permission holders as well. So we have several forest blocks within the region with recreational shooting as well, which help towards our culling. Next slide, please. So the hows, excuse this graph, the fade doesn't mean anything. I just ran out of Excel skills to try and get this fade gone, so apologies for that. So as you see, so our cull year runs from April to March. The middle of the year there, that's males only. So culling is greatly reduced in the summer months from April to August. Males only. So from September to March, we are shooting out of season, night shooting and day stalking, and we are shooting using non-lead ammunition as well. You can see the spikes there in September, October. This isn't just one single tool achieving these culls. This is everything combined from in-season, out-of-season, night shooting, day shooting, high seats, walked up shooting. This is the whole contribution of everything together within those couple of months that produce these high culls. As I say, that there's no one tool that delivers a high cull. It is everything together. The next slide, please. Yeah, so the collaboration and partnerships we have in the region. We've got three. We've got the Cairngorms Connect project. FLS and NatureScot work quite closely together, and we've got a wee area up in Caithness with Plant Life Scotland. So if we go to the next slide, is the Cairngorm Connect project. Cairngorms Connect, I'm sure a lot of you would have heard about this or seen it online. It's a collaborative agreement between RSPB, NatureScot, Woodland Limited and FLS. That's the land holding contributions in the map there. 600 square kilometres of the Cairngorms National Park with a 200-year landscape scale vision for habitat restoration. It's a great project. We're all like-minded landowners working towards the same goal. We're doing a lot of work on non-native removal, habitat restoration and deer management. Collaborative deer management, we have got two floating deer stalkers that work on 3 of the land holdings, RSPB, FLS and NatureScot. Wildland Limited, they've got quite a resource themselves, so they don't really need a hand there. Information sharing between all the landowners really helps with deer culling and well, planning next year's management as well. Next slide, Iain, please. This is the FLS and NatureScot collaborative agreement. So we have there are several sites. So NatureScot's Inveresham, Inshake, NNR, the Craigmeggy NNR, and the FLS Strathmashi, Slaterdale and Arkinshell. So this is a collaborative agreement to share all the staff and equipment and resources just to improve delivery of public sector deer management. A good point to mention in this one between the staff, deer stalking can be quite an isolated job for rangers. This agreement greatly helps with bringing isolated people together to do some team shoots and collaboration, increases morale within the team. And if you have increased morale, people are happy. It's the deer cull goes up and people work, they're far more happy to work together. Far more happy to work in isolation if they know that next week they're going to go and meet somebody and they're going to do a team cull together and work together, work in the larder together. It really does help with staff morale. Next slide, please. And then we've got this a nice little place called Munsery up in Caithness with Plant Life Scotland. This is a good agreement where obviously it's an isolated place way up in Caithness. This collaboration, so it reduces the deer management costs for Plant Life because we carry out the deer management, but it reduces the fencing requirement for FLS because we bound two sides, so it's a square. We bound two sides of it, so we don't need to pay for deer fence and deer fence maintenance, and we're happy to manage the deer on the ground. So again, that's another really good collaboration there. Next slide, please. So future direction and challenges. So everything that we're doing is evidence-based. So we're using population modelling, deer damage assessments, habitat impact assessments, and dung counting as well. Again, no one tool sets the cull target. We're looking at everything. We're looking at the bigger picture for damage and population to set culls in our forests. We would like to increase and continue all of our collaboration and partnership working. We're always open. And see, we've got plenty of larders spread across the country, spread across the region and the country. So we're always open to more collaboration, working together. And just a point to say that all of our deer stalking and venison production is produced through the Scottish Wild Venison Quality Assurance Scheme. And sika is just an absolutely fascinating species to mention. They are so resilient. They are able to breed and produce. They're such fatty animals off what would be considered just a Sitka plantation. They're a really interesting species and a very challenging species to manage in the future, and we're only going to see an increase in sika management. I think, yeah, that's me done there.
Okay, thank you, Iain and Tom. Thanks for that. Some plenty of questions coming in the discussion. So I will start putting them to you if you're happy to answer some. So firstly, why can't Forestry and Land Scotland make more land available to recreational stalkers with the relevant qualifications in order to earn money rather than paying for contractors?
We do make land available to recreational stalkers. No, we talked about deer culling contractors with recreational permissions. So there's opportunities for recreational stalkers to bid for the land or the work there to actually do it. You know, so they're not restricted from not being in there. One of the things that we do find with recreational stalkers, they do offer a great value to help controlling deer and across the whole of Scotland, but a lot of them have got alternative work, i.e. they're not always available at the times and take full advantage of all the windows to be able to deliver against us. So as much as we value them, there is 2 or 3 wee things there that prevent them to be maybe being on site as often as we'd like. Whereas when we've got our own in-house staff, we've got our contractors, we can direct them where, when, what we want to do, and get a commitment of time on that. So there is opportunities there for them.
Thank you, Iain. Okay, there's a question from Lucy here that is for Sinclair, but it also has implications for Forestry and Land Scotland as well. So I'll ask the question, Sinclair, if you want to come in, and then possibly Iain or Tom to follow up. So the MWDS report, recommendation 33, stated that NatureScot should take a far more focused approach to identifying the current extent of damage to agriculture by wild deer in different parts of Scotland and take action to tackle the local issues. The Scottish Government accepted the recommendation, and NatureScot committed to take forward work to ensure agricultural damage by deer is suitably managed. Can Sinclair comment on how they intend to do this? It then goes on, the second part of that is that farmers and crofters are seeing increased impacts of deer, most dramatically in arable crops, but also in improved grassland, and often deer are encroaching from neighbouring forestry plantations where deer fences are not being maintained. So Sinclair, do you want to come in there first?
Well, currently we simply react to concerns coming in from agricultural, or not just agricultural, but any interests about negative impacts on whatever the happens to be. So for we this time of the year in particular, we get a lot of calls from farmers, crofters about deer coming into their the fresh grass that's just coming through, and we're just trying to be make sure that there's a good link between those owners or occupiers and the landowners that they're neighbouring or that they're on, and trying to work with them in partnership to get the issues addressed sort of in season, in daylight where possible, and if not, use the authorizations process to be able to reduce some of those negative impacts. So just now it's particularly challenging. You don't want to be culling females, or it'd be unlikely for us to license culling females after the end of March, but males could be culled year round. As to the specifics taken forward from the Deer Working Group report, I don't have those specifics, but to date, but that's part of what our additional resources will be looking at is having more focused means of and perhaps being able to predict where damage is likely to happen based on good grass and deer densities.
Thank you, Sinclair. So Iain or Tom, I don't know if you want to come in on this issue and note that of fences around forestry not being maintained.
I touched a wee bit that on my presentation about whether we've got a legal obligation on that to do it. But I think what is really good here, and Tom touched on it as well, is talking about partnership, collaborative type working. You know, and I would advise if there was any issues like that for the local crofters community person involved to get in touch with like Tom, the local area wildlife manager, and start to have some dialogue about how we can address the issue. Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Just, I mean, the point that I've been saying to people is that a fence is there to divide two different land management practices. Therefore, each landowner is responsible for the maintenance of that fence. So it's easy to point the finger at one landowner, but the fence is there as a march boundary and is 50% contribution to everybody, and we will always be available to offer the 50% contribution.
Okay, thank you. There's then a couple of comments about the fact it's also relevant in rural communities where increasing deer numbers are affecting and damaging small-scale horticulture and gardens. And Duncan's come in to say that ENGO landowners are keen to work with FLS in collaboration. The Deer Dashboard and evidence-based approach is an excellent step forward. But the next question is from David, and that is that Forestry and Land Scotland have moved towards using non-lead ammunition. With the current state of the firearms industry, specifically ammunition and the lack of ammunition, will FLS persist with this approach until there is more research in the effective use of this type of ammo, its sustainable availability, and the problems seen by its use?
Yeah, we are committed to using non-lead ammunition. We've been using it for the last 3-4 years, and we've got no plans to change. Again, I'm not aware of a shortage of it. I'm not at that sharp end purchasing it. Tom, have you any experience of obtaining ammunition?
It fluctuates, and it's been fluctuating because of COVID and the American market buying up massive amounts of ammunition. That there is no issue, global issue, with the future production of non-toxic ammunition or copper ammunition. Performance, we have no issues with it. As you say, we shoot in excess of 35,000 deer per year, and there isn't an issue with performance. Yes, we use one bullet to shoot a 6-kilo roe deer to a 100-kilo stag. You're going to have issues at either end of the spectrum, but to have one caliber and one bullet to shoot all species, there is no perfect fit.
Okay, thank you. Helen's come in to say that in 2001 at a deer seminar at Tullyallen, it was maintained that by 2003 to 2004, the deer levels would be at an acceptable level and contract stalkers would be phased out. You reported in your presentation, Iain, that deer damage was at 18%. So what's gone wrong. And I suppose I'd add into that, you know, what can we do to change that?
I think what's gone wrong, obviously we've not achieved what was said at that seminar back in 2001 or whatever. I mean, deer numbers have risen. Where we are, though, is we are in a far better place than what we were in 2001 in regard to having an indication of what the deer densities are in our forests, what the deer impacts that they're having, what's happening in neighbouring ground, which is allowing us now to take, hopefully, a much more evidence-based approach in towards our cull setting going forward.
Okay, we've got another question about fences and maintaining fences, which I think we've discussed already, so I'll move on from that. And Duncan's also mentioned about the RSPB's use of non-lead ammo. They've used it for over a decade and not experienced significant issues, and so is supportive of phasing that out. But the next question from John asking what proportion of the total numbers in the region do each species cull numbers represent roughly? So I think we had them nationally, did we, in your presentation, but regionally, what sort of proportion do the species represent?
Tom, is that for you in the north?
Well, the species across the country or across the region?
Well, the question is about in the region.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe you've got to look that up, Tom.
It's about, yeah, I need to look it up. I'm not going to pluck a figure out my head. Yeah, say red and Sika are about the same, and rose about 25%, and red and Sika are about equal. But yeah, I would need to look it up and give you an exact figure on that.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Tom has come in to ask if FLS are consistently culling the equivalent of 6 to 10 deer per kilometre squared per annum off the National Forest estate in Scotland and are looking to increase their cull. What deer population do FLS think they are dealing with on the National Forest estate?
No, we haven't got those figures yet. As I say, a lot of the work's going to be done on population modelling over the next year, you know, going forward. Without me going and checking, I couldn't tell you what the actual average cull per hectare is, 100 hectares is across the estate. But if Tom wants to get in contact with me, I can certainly look to get that figure for him. If he wants to get in contact with him separately, no problem.
Can I just add a point to raise here is deer incursion is that a significant amount of deer that we are culling are coming into the forest. They're not really resident.
Okay, I'm just taking note of the time, so we'll try and get through a couple more questions, but any that we don't get through here, we will try and answer after the seminar. So what's the difference between a damage assessment and a habitat impact assessment?
Yeah. The nearest neighbour impact assessments is purely looking at the browsing on trees planted on the ground that are 1 year old, looking at the leader browsing on that. Habitat impact assessment is wider. It tends to be looking at browsing of even adjacent plants, trees, the grass, whatever round about. So it's two different type of methods. There seems to be a move towards habitat impact assessment being accepted by the industry going forward, and we are doing that in some of our land, particularly where environmental teams are carrying out these type of assessments on special areas of conservation, etc. Whereas the nearest neighbours more on commercial crops.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Alan's asking in a follow-up to his previous question, out of the acres of land controlled by FLS, how many acres are available to recreational stalkers as a rough percentage?
No, come back to me. Can we answer that as one of the other questions, and I can be precise?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Yeah, certainly. Okay, I'm just going to ask one more here before we move on to the next presentation. So Romany is asking, how do you feed dung count information into a system to inform your cull?
The dung count information that we've got, that is carried out by independent environmental contractors who carry out the assessment, the survey work. They then carry out all the calculations and they come back and provide us with a report that shows that within that report, it then gives us an estimate of the deer population that was in that species, but also gives us the location of where they collected all the dung and how much dung was there. And that allows you to then plot that into the maps. So when the results come back, you get an estimate of the population within there, but it also shows you the highest usage of deer within that area that was surveyed at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Iain, and thank you, Iain and Tom, for that. I'd like to invite Drew McFarlane-Slack to give the next presentation. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Nathan. I'll switch off my camera as you advised to try and make sure that the sound remains in best order for this. Very much to give me the opportunity to share the Monadhliath experience with you. Like you know, one or two other folk here, I am no expert in deer management. I chair the Monadhliath Deer Management because I've got experience chairing meetings rather than managing deer. However, I've been doing this now for close on 8 years, and I have gathered some experience in the area. Deer management in Scotland is an important issue. I think we all agree on that, and that red deer are one of our iconic species. Images of the animal have long been used to help describe an aspect of Scotland to ourselves and to our international audiences. I won't at this stage really refer to other deer species which live in Scotland, but it's not because of our disinterest in these other species. But we feel at this time there's really no coherent policies that exist to deal with other species, particularly below the fence line. And that's something that we're interested in. That's not a criticism. It's a call to see some action taken on that, as described in the Deer Working Group report. We would like to understand and assist with that process of dealing with deer below the fence line within our area. But we just cannot find a method and the finance to do it. So that said, let me go on. Red deer, as most of you are aware, have been subject to one of the longest running scientific studies of large vertebrates in the world. The RUM project has given an insight into population dynamics, which is invaluable to deer managers and the Monadhliaths. Our technical advisors, Strathcollie Limited, and more specifically their founder, Douglas Campbell, and his team, have made use of the RUM knowledge base to help devise a strategic deer management plan to put before the Monadhliath members in April 2015. The Monadhliath Deer Management Group was formed in the 1960s and comprises over 40 private estates, but including one owned by the Scottish Government via NatureScot at Craigmeggy. The Monadhliath Mountains could be described as the centre of Scotland, and I think it is done by some people in Newtonmore, if we include the Highlands in that, but I don't want to start an argument about it. Its boundaries stretch from Spean Bridge in Lochaber to Tomatin near Inverness, and then across to Fort Augustus in the west to Kincraig near Aviemore in the east. We've got a little bit of the Cairngorm National Park within our boundaries. And our area is around about 175,000 hectares of land. Some of our owners have long histories of continuing stewardship of the land going back to the 1800s. One or two are relatively new to the modern and still developing rights and responsibilities that come with estate ownership and management. However, they all have access to professional support teams who can and do advise them. And of course, they also receive support and advice from the deer management group itself. The Monadhliath Deer Management Group's primary aim when it started was to increase red deer populations in the Monadhliaths to provide sporting animals for shooting. Most estates at that time wanted to protect and grow the number of stags available for sport, as this was an important element of their business. They erected a 170-mile long deer fence around the Monadhliaths to try and protect the red deer assets. But by the late 1990s, the deer population within the fence had grown substantially beyond what was required for sport, and several of the larger estates began taking their own decisions to increase their annual culls to deal with this. The motivations for it were varied. Some owners wanted to improve grouse populations, they weren't interested in deer. Others were keen to restore habitats by natural regeneration of woodlands. This created significant tensions within the deer management group at that time, and that spilled over sometimes into heated public debate in the press at the time. In addition, the EU Natura 2000 directive was being implemented and had at that time led to discussions between Monadhliath Deer Management Group members and SNH, now NatureScot, about the application of measures, including land management plans, with incentives that could be put in place to encourage owners to operate much more in sympathy with nature conservation objectives. Scottish Natural Heritage also, as we have heard this morning, had powers to impose sanctions on the Monadhliath Deer Management Group with the aim of turning degraded special areas of conservation into favourable conditions if no actions were taken by the group. The members of the Deer Management Group agreed that the best method to resolve this matter would be to undertake a novel planning process involving all the members of the group, with the aim of producing a 10-year strategic deer management plan, or SDMP. And with the support of Strathcollie and their team, the Monadhliath estates were asked to provide details of their historic culls and other policy information. That data was collected and collated over a 2-year period with face-to-face interviews with owners and staff. The data and the policies were analysed, and discussions took place with SNH on the management of the designated sites within the Monadhliaths. And then in 2015, at its annual general meeting, the Monadhliath Deer Management Group members approved the plan. The main thrust of the project was to halve the number of red deer inside the fence within the first 3 years of the plan by concentrating mainly on a hind cull, but including some stags, which is what the Rum experiment suggested was the best method of reducing the fecundity of the herd. It allowed relatively more stags to be available to estates for their sporting businesses during the cull, as that overall herd size and fecundity reduced. We are now in year 8 of that plan, and we've started the process of mapping out the next 10 years. I took over the chairmanship of the project in 2015 from Jamie Williamson of Albion-Dalradi Estates. He remains a member of our executive management group, which consists of 7 members, including NatureScot, and a representative from the local moorland group. And I'm an independent chair. Strathcollie's Dougie Campbell attends our meetings as our technical professional support, and together we implement our strategic deer management plan on behalf of our members. Our key achievements to date are that we reduced our deer herd by 50% in the first 3 years. It seems quite a simple statement, but achieving it was high maintenance. Thankfully, the plan had been agreed, but getting buy-in from staff on individual estates was not yet a done deal. And our job included meeting regularly with estate staff during these early years and impressing upon them the need to focus on these annual culls with enough staff to achieve our strategic targets. And these targets were quite simple: to maintain the herd at this level and provide sufficient stags for the state's sporting requirements, to encourage new woodland planting. Current plans in place now exceed those original objectives, and to restore and maintain in good condition degraded peatland across the deer management area, but in particular within the Craigmeggy and Monadhliath SACs. We have to date managed to complete 4,500 hectares of peatland restoration, currently around 15% of the total restored peatland in the whole of Scotland. This achievement is entirely due to buy-in from members of the deer management group and their willingness to acknowledge and deal with them, even when staff on the ground were sceptical. The creation of our strategic deer management plan gave us the authority to act and deliver our agreed objectives. The buy-in to that plan by private estates and NatureScot in the Monadhliath over the last 7 years has provided the opportunities for significant improvements to our SACs, opportunities for new woodlands, and improvements to water quality, which could not have been carried out without that primary cull. The on-site management of the project by a team of competent and objective scientists has also given us the confidence that our project is heading in the right direction. So to summarise, good planning, good data, strong management, together with the willingness of our membership to move in a difficult direction for them, has proved to be able to deliver those objectives in sporting stags, but has also been able to get us to a position where our designated sites can be restored over, it's going to take us a long period of time, but they're going to be able to be restored, and where new woodland can be planned and delivered without losing all of our red deer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Drew. Really interesting and a really good case study there of, you know, what can be taken forward. So there's been, yeah, a bit of discussion about government priorities and fencing going on in the chat, but the first question here from Rose Scott is, have you recorded any improvements in the condition and larder weights of deer since reduction in population density?
That I'm afraid I cannot answer, because I don't have the information in front of us. But there have been, I know, and particularly in Alvin Dalradi estates, you know, they are selling many more of their red deer locally to the area, and I know that improvements in larders in that area have meant that there's much more venison being sold in that locality now than before. So unfortunately, Ro, I can't answer that question specifically, but I'm certain that that the reduction in deer in that area has certainly seen improvements in the quality and weights and the deer that we have available for markets.
Okay, thank you, Drew. So David Tullis come in to say that the history of the Monadhliath DMG is no different to other DMG groups within the Highlands and elsewhere, and it's one of the clear reasons why there's been a large increase in deer numbers. What incentives are available to those groups to do a lot more to reduce the numbers, and what incentives would these groups like to see available to them? So yeah, I suppose that's not necessarily a question that, Drew, you can answer individually, because it's asking, you know, what a number of DMGs would like to see. But I don't know if you've got an opinion on that, Drew, you'd like to share.
Well, the reality is that within the Monadhliath, we had a group of members, by and large a group of members, who were coherent in what they wanted to do. Now, that hasn't lasted for the entire length of the last 8 years. We have seen some estates who, you know, have argued that we're not moving fast enough. Central to that was Caorann Estate, who left our deer management group 2 years ago. That was a big disappointment to us. However, Caorann Estate are actually running their business largely in the same direction that the Monadhliath Deer Management Group is running. So despite the fact that we no longer receive any financial benefit from Caorann Estate's membership of our group, they are still carrying out the same kind of functions that the DMG are carrying out. So they're running with the grain of what we're doing. So there's no real loss to the group apart from the financial input to our organisation. So, I mean, what I would say is that I wouldn't want to say that we are doing something that everyone else should emulate, because it's simply not possible in other parts of the country where different situations arise. Strong management given to us by our membership to carry out the functions of a coherent plan, and that plan is at the heart of what we're doing. And if other deer management groups have got a strong plan and they're willing to work to it, they can achieve the same kind of outcomes as we have.
Okay, thank you. David's also followed up to ask what FLS and NatureScot's thoughts are on that. So, yeah, what sort of incentives should these groups be offered, or what should be available to them? Sinclair, do you want to come in first on that?
Yeah, well, I can talk about the existing measures that are available. So the agri-environment scheme is open again now, more widely than it was last year. So there's certainly provision for moorland management payments within there, kind of 124 a hectare across the land holding or the moorland area, which is quite a significant, or can be quite a significant assistance. There are also measures on for protected areas on reducing deer impacts at a more landscape scale. I think part of the difficulty there is getting everybody within the deer range to apply for that together to both make it more useful and to gain more points and thereby be successful in the application, because it is still competitive. We've got a number of funds that we've been promoting over the last number of years, which come round on a sort of annual basis. So, for example, the Biodiversity Challenge Fund, I think that's been renamed recently. I don't have it in my head, but so there are, I think, other funds for those that are considering landscape scale land management change for the benefit of biodiversity. I think there's mechanisms there to go with that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Nathan, could I just mention one thing that perhaps may be of interest to those who are listening. Within the Monadhliaths, we operate our peatland restoration programme as a collaboration between 14 estates within the Monadhliaths. There are estates like Caorann and other estates who are carrying out peatland restoration on their own, but we have 14 estates who are doing this with the aid of an umbrella grant from NatureScot's peatland action team. Now, this may be not something we have the ability now to, within the 14 participating estates, to move equipment, to move staff across borders, to carry out peatland restoration works and get benefit from having multi-estate work being carried out by a number of different contractors. Now, it's a complicated process It's not been easy getting this set up and managed, but we are doing it. And you know, if other areas in Scotland are looking to carry out peatland restoration at a scale, then it may be worthwhile looking at this particular umbrella project that we have as something that could. Okay.
Thank you. I didn't know if Tom or Iain wanted to come in there just to give an opinion from FLS.
I've got to be honest, for my side of things, I'm not really right up to date on the grant schemes and can't add any more to what Sinclair or Drew said. I would probably point people towards Scottish Forestry. They tend to be more any grants that's available, you know, from that side, rather than FLS. We're more the operational arm, if you like, of forestry.
Yeah, and I see in the discussion that Catherine Wares has mentioned that there's sustainable management of forestry grants from Scottish Forestry available. So, okay, one more question, and then I think we'll have a short few minutes comfort break before we have Linzi. So, Peter Lowe is asking that do you feel that the Monadhliath Deer Management Group are getting close to their objective, or is there more of a journey to go to get to your final objective? And how do you plan to monitor progress or otherwise?
Yeah, I don't think it's a done deal. I think we've still got a long way to go. Certainly, there's an enormous amount of restored peatland still to be done in the Monadhliath area. But I think the processes that we have used to develop strategic planning opportunities within the Monadhliath has been key to it. We are a constituted organisation which has allowed us to apply to peatland action for funds, for the umbrella fund that I spoke of earlier on. That has allowed us to do things differently, I think, from a number of other deer management groups. So we've definitely not finished the job, but we are, you know, we've had a great lift from being able to work across the Monadhliath with that internal partnership and then in partnership with agencies. As I say, I don't think it's the be all and end all, but I think what we've done in the Monadhliath is important. And I think people should look at it and analyse it. And perhaps smarter people than me can look at all of this and spit out some data that might be helpful to other groups.
Okay, thank you, Drew. So that's 11:25 now. I'll suggest a 5-minute comfort break, and then we can come back at 11:30 for Linzi's presentation. Okay, thank you. Hi everybody, welcome back. That's 11:30 now. So to get back underway, we've got Linzi Seivwright from Caorann Ecological Consultancy. Apologies if I've got any of those pronunciations wrong, Linzi, but I'd like to invite you to give your presentation at this time.
Thanks very much indeed. Now, just to give you a bit of a warning, I'm getting over COVID, so I'm not convinced my voice is gonna hold up, but we'll give it a go. So I'm an ecological consultant, and I've been working in deer management for the last 17 years. But what I want to talk about today is just deer management within the Western Ross Biosphere. I want to look at some of the challenges. We've heard already about some of those facing the deer management sector, but just to go through what some of those challenges are again, and then also thinking about what we need to do more importantly to future-proof the deer management sector to be able to cope with some of these challenges ahead. So essentially, in terms of the Western Ross Biosphere, there are 669 biosphere reserves across 120 countries, and the purpose of them, as you've heard, is to reconcile biodiversity conservation with sustainable use. The Western Ross Biosphere was designated in 1976 with a core area of just over 5,300 hectares. But since then, it's been extended. It was extended in 2016 with the addition of about 530,000 hectares. So it's certainly expanded over that time. Within that biosphere, just to give you an idea, this is a map of the deer management groups across Scotland. And within the biosphere area, there are actually 5 operating deer management groups within that area, covering that area. The group that I'm going to be talking about is Gairloch Conservation Unit, and that sits right in the middle of that core area. And I've been working with this group since 2016, helping them with deer management planning and also how to deliver the deer management plans. But before I take a bit of a dive into the Gairloch group, I just want to talk a little bit more broadly about the sort of principles of sustainable deer management. So I think it's really important that we remember that wild deer are a huge asset to Scotland, and they do contribute to a range of public benefits. They play an important part in our rural economy. They're an integral part of Scotland's biodiversity, and they provide us with healthy food and recreational opportunities. But we also know, as we've been hearing, that deer can also have negative impacts on the public interest, not just on the environment, but also on other wider management objectives such as forestry, agriculture, crofting, as well as impacts on human health through things like deer vehicle collisions and basically their role in things like Lyme disease. So the key to managing deer sustainably is about maximising all the benefits that we get from deer and minimising the negative effects. All very straightforward, you would think. But talking about focusing in on Gairloch Conservation Unit. So Gairloch Conservation Unit extends to about 42,000 hectares and has 7 main land ownerships. As a bit of a background to Gairloch Conservation Unit, in 1951, the estate Ben A was bought by the Nature Conservancy and became the first national nature reserve. And at the time, John Morton Boyd and Dick Balharry, who was a warden at the time, realised that to achieve the plans that they wanted to implement, the plans that they had for the reserve, that they recognised that they were going to have to work with neighbouring estates on all sides. And this really led to this group being formed. It was essentially the first deer management group, although they had the foresight to call themselves a conservation group, really to reflect the wide range of interests and not just deer. So in terms of land ownership, Gairloch Conservation Unit area is no different to many deer management groups in that what we've got is a very sort of complex mosaic of different land uses. It's a real melting pot of different objectives, and that's certainly the case in the group area. We've got a mixture of publicly owned land owned and managed by an NGO. We've got private land ownership, as well as crofting interests throughout. So I say it's a real melting pot of objectives. The issue, of course, is that red deer in particular are a free-ranging species, and the population may range over numerous land holdings. So if we're going to try and sustainably manage the herd to deliver multiple objectives, as you've been hearing so much about, we need a collaborative approach. And certainly the way to facilitate that collaboration is to have a really good deer management planning process in place. And you've been hearing about some of that from Drew earlier. So just to give you a flavour for some of the things that we're looking at within the Gairloch area, certainly designated sites are of a very great importance to the area. About a third of the area is designated as an SAC, and I think there are 6 triple SIs within the area, as well as wider designations of National Scenic Area, and then the designations we've been hearing about in terms of the NNRs and also the Biosphere. So it's a very heavily designated area, and that's a key component of the deer management plan. This doesn't really reflect the true extent of native woodland. This is from the Native Woodland Survey of Scotland, which was done some years ago. But essentially, there's about 1,800 hectares of native woodland. That'll certainly be more, much more. And I'm sure someone will fill me in from NatureScot, because Ben A have certainly increased the native woodland cover on that end of the estate. So this is probably quite old data now, but just to say that within the area, the Native Woodland Survey was reflecting that much of the impacts were certainly in the low-medium category. We're hearing a lot about the need for woodland expansion, and that's sort of certainly cropping up the agenda. There's been quite a significant component of the Gairloch Conservation Unit And over the last 20 years, over 5,000 hectares of new woodland was one of the biggest schemes there in Gairloch of its time. So that's certainly an important component. And I think it's just important to say also that since 2016, there's been over 12,000 hectares of woodland created within the upland deer management groups. That's since 2016. That's 28% of the UK total. So deer management groups are contributing to this, probably more than people are aware. And then we're, as well as sort of woodlands, we're interested in some of the wider upland habitats, in particular peatland. Within this particular area, we don't have so much peatland. There's about 2,000 hectares of peatlands, but certainly we've got a lot more sort of montane interests and wider heather moorland interests. We're not just interested in the in the extent of habitats. What we want to look at is the condition of these habitats, and we want to look at being able to measure the impact of herbivores by looking at trampling impacts and looking at grazing impacts. And the group has been engaged in this over a number of years across all those habitats that I've been mentioning. So the value in doing this is that you can start to map some of these impacts and look at certainly how those impacts look across the board, and you're able to start to drill down into where some of those impacts may be higher. And that's really important to try and understand. Coming to deer sort of numbers, we always get quite excited about deer numbers, but in terms of just wider population, we're currently sitting nationally, it's predicted a population of less than 10 deer per square kilometre, which is what the current recommendation is within the deer working group. We're currently about 9 deer per square kilometre nationally on average. But within the group, the last deer count was conducted in 2017, and that had showed a density of just under 4 deer per square kilometre. And in fact, the objectives within the group are to push that target to further. So we're looking at a target density of just over 3 that we believe will deliver the objectives of the group. But it's not just deer numbers that we're interested in. And I think a really important thing that we have to look at is how deer are distributed across the landscape. So this is just showing the count data represented as the distribution of hinds, and then looking at the distribution of stags. So the more information that we have about how deer are distributed and the way that they're moving across the landscape is really valuable. And in particular, one of the things that we're really interested in is looking at deer occupancy. The bottom graph shows you the counts that were taken over a number of months on Ben A. These are monthly counts. So you can see that deer numbers fluctuate incredibly over the months. So this is about understanding deer occupancy, because much of the conflict that exists within deer management is about deer being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and these temporal changes in density. So getting a better handle on some of that is really important. And then really good deer management is just about trying to pull together all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. So bringing together information that we have on habitat condition, habitat impacts, overlaying information that we've gathered on deer densities, deer movements, and just trying to pull it all together in a big sort of jigsaw puzzle, and using that information to help set culls and be able to inform our deer management moving forward. You know, we use population modelling. We're able to adjust deer models, just the culls, so that we can ensure that we are achieving the aims that we set out to do. So that's just a quick rundown of sort of deer management. And in a sense, it's no different to deer management that's happening all over Scotland. And I think we've perhaps heard already, you know, over the last particularly 10 years, deer management has come under considerable scrutiny from the Scottish Government. And there has been certain challenges that the deer management sector has faced, in particular making sure that all 50 of those deer management groups have got a deer management plan in place. And that was a target that was set for 2019. And indeed, that target was met. And now the challenge is really delivering on those deer management plans. But it's I think we have to acknowledge, the Scottish Government has acknowledged that progress has been made within the deer sector over that time. But of course, it's not really any time to rest on laurels, as there's a whole raft of challenges coming to the fore that will be really important for deer management moving forward. So the first of these, and we've heard Sinclair talking a little bit about this, is going to be the recommendations that have come from the Deer Working Group report. That has got the potential to really change the way that we manage deer, either through changes in primary and secondary legislation, or more generally in terms of other elements of that report. So that's going to be a significant factor. I think arguably the most important challenge is going to be how we tackle climate emergency, biodiversity loss, and also the impact of the global pandemic that we're unfortunately still in. The Scottish Government, as I'm sure you all know, has set really ambitious targets for climate change mitigations, and every sector is going to be expected to contribute to meeting targets. And the deer management sector is no different. The way that we use the land is going to be absolutely critical to how Scotland responds to climate change, and at the very least, I think all landowners will certainly be expected not to contribute to any further degradation of the land. I think that's obvious, but where the emphasis is going to be is on environmental enhancement. Now, how that's funded, we've had some questions about funding. I think that's still sort of slightly up in the air at the moment, but whether that's through private funding, whether that's government funding this idea of public money for public goods, or whether there's significant private investment coming in through sort of carbon schemes, etc. So I think the focus will be on environmental enhancement, but I think the critical part of this is that deer management is going to be absolutely essential to this. It's going to underpin all of this. So deer management moving forward is only going to become more important, not less. One of the challenges that I think is important that we need to think about is, and it faces us all, is just this thing about trying to find common ground, trying to work together to move forward. Deer management increasingly finds itself at the heart of really complex and emotive, polarised debates on everything from deer welfare, land reform, ethics of hunting, climate change, the lot, and much of this is played out through the lens of not just the media, but also social media. And all this really does is encourage this very tribal mentality when it comes to some of these discussions, and we've got to move away from that. There's far more to be gained from us working together, and that's really important. I think for too long, deer have been seen as part of the problem, and I think we need to change the narrative. Deer management is actually an important part of the solution in all of this. So there's lots of changes ahead and challenges ahead for the deer management sector. I think there are many within the deer management sector that are going to feel the uncertainty of these changes, and that's completely understandable. So for some, it may seem like we've got a long road ahead, but I think the other way of looking at it is to sort of embrace it and say, well, what opportunities exist for deer management moving forward? And I just want to sort of think about 4 sort of key areas that I think that we should be focusing on to make sure that the deer management of the future is really fit for purpose and is able to tackle some of these challenges head on. So the first of these is making sure that we're building capacity and infrastructure. We really need good quality jobs, a really good skilled workforce, and creating business opportunities in rural communities. And I think deer-related employment and all the associated income and potentially private investment could play an important role in supporting certainly the green recovery of these sort of fragile rural areas. An example of this is just thinking how we might make more of our venison resource. So we need to make sure that local communities get access to really good quality local food, and venison is a prime product for that. So it's building that capacity and infrastructure. We've heard a lot about this, and it's a common theme that's running through most of the talks. Collaboration is going to be absolutely vital moving forward. It was slightly disappointing to see the Deer Working Group recommendations almost slightly downplay the role of certainly deer management groups. They did recognise that there are other forums and other ways of working, and that's recognised. But moving forward, I think collaboration is absolutely vital. And we have the collaborative mechanisms in place. We've got 50 deer management groups, all with deer management plans that cover something like 3 million hectares of the upland. So that mechanism is in place. I think we just need to make sure that we strengthen those mechanisms and support those mechanisms to deliver these challenges moving forward. As has been mentioned already, and Drew made reference to it, I think information is absolutely key. The more quality information that we have at our fingertips, the more effective our deer management plans and deer management planning can be. And I think technology plays a really important part of that. And certainly the advances in technology are just happening all the time. Whether that's the use of satellite imagery, the use of drones, we've got the use of thermal imaging equipment. All of this is hopefully going to help us make deer management more effective. But lastly, and I think for me it's one of the most important things, I think the most invaluable opportunity that we have, not just as deer managers, but certainly for a lot of us on this call today, is to find opportunities to connect people to the landscape and to nature, and in particular how we sort of engage in the next generation. I read a statistic recently which is that 83% of our Scottish population is considered to be an urban population. So we've all got a responsibility, I think, to create opportunities for people to engage in the rural environment, to connect with nature, and we know all the benefits that come from that. But I think that's certainly for me something that's very important that we should be considering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. I'm glad your voice held out. Yeah, we've had a question which actually, Lindsay, because of your role in Wester Ross and in the sort of sustainability aspect to this, might be able to answer, but if not, then some of our other speakers might be able to come in on this as well. But it's from Iain Turnbull saying that so far presentations have centred on deer numbers and management with little reference to other grazing animals, for example, sheep and cattle. Looking at complex ecological systems from a single perspective can be misleading, and many of our locations are sensitive to grazing pressure, so missing part of the equation could be dangerous. Is anyone able to talk about any initiatives to take a holistic approach to grazing management?
I think there's a real opportunity here, and I understand that this is happening at a strategic level, is that we've got the agencies and the different people involved in agriculture, in forestry, and in the wider environment, hopefully all talking together to make sure that moving forward some of our policies, and hopefully from that some of the funding mechanisms, really reflect that very point. Because up until this point, I think there's been quite a disjointed approach to this, and often sheep numbers coming in conflict with good environmental condition. And then we've also got to think about, again, just crystal ball gazing. If we're looking to start removing sheep from some of these upland areas, there's going to be an implication for deer management. So it's all about sort of future crystal ball gazing slightly, but making sure we've got it from the top down, that more sort of joined up thinking.
Okay, I'm not sure if any of our other presenters wanted to come in there. Duncan, yes.
I've just mentioned in the chat, but NatureScot obviously carry out site condition monitoring for protected areas, and the focus at the moment is very much on upland and woodland habitats, which are in more unfavourable condition than some other types of habitats. And the key driver there is, for many of these upland and woodland sites, is highlighted as deer damage, not sheep damage.
Yeah, I think there's a real challenge that we're facing with designated sites, looking across the board. Deer are just one element of what is recorded in many cases, but I think, again, moving forward, very often we do have a proportion of sites that are in unfavourable condition. Deer potentially and other herbivores are implicated, but I think what we're finding is that it's almost that 80-20% principle. So the last 20% of designated sites that are in unfavourable condition are complex sites. There's not easy wins to be trying to address this. It's very often a case of trying to balance different features, for example, within one sort of site, that some may require more grazing pressure, some may require less. So I'm not sure that we're ever going to get to the stage where all our designated sites are in favourable condition for that reason. But I think we have to put deer and deer management in a context here.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Linzi at this point? Lots of comments from people saying they enjoyed your presentation, Linzi, which is good. If we've got no more questions at this point in time, then we'll move on to our final speaker today, Duncan Orr-Ewing from RSPB.
Hi everybody, thank you Nathan for the invitation. I'll just try and upload my presentation. Okay, is everybody seeing that?
Yes, but it's not the presentation view at the moment, it's seeing all the slides.
So do I just go into from the beginning?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
There we go. That's it, yeah.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. I've been invited today to talk about Abernethy Forest, 33 years of woodland expansion. I should say I'm Head of Species and Land Management with RSPB Scotland, so I have a responsibility for the management of all of our nature reserve network in Scotland, which is 77 sites. I should also mention that I'm also the chair of the Link Deer Group, which comprises of all of the main ENGO landowning groups across Scotland, as well as some other environmental interests, like some of the recreational interests, for example, the Ramblers. Okay, and like others, and I also enjoyed Linzi's presentation and a lot of common ground, as Linzi suggests. The context is important here. So Scotland's deer population is now estimated to be over 1 million animals, and deer have to be managed humanely, as we know, in the absence of natural predators such as lynx and wolf in particular, which are of course extinct. It has been mentioned previously as well that deer cause a variety of damage to public interests, including natural heritage woodlands and public interests, social interests such as road traffic accidents and Lyme disease. I mean, this is not to decry in any way the role that, deer have as an iconic species or a natural part of ecosystems. We all accept that, the native deer species at least, but of course, several of the deer species that we have are of course non-native species. It has been mentioned previously that we've had the Independent Deer Working Group report, which was commissioned by Scottish Government and is going to present in the future a sharper focus on protecting public interests and ensuring public goods are delivered through deer management. And Linzi has covered that in some detail. Just to say that the Link Deer Group strongly supports the recommendations of the Deer Working Group report. I can't hide the fact that our group are frustrated about lack of progress over deer management, which goes back, I mean, if you look, we've had seven separate government inquiries over an 80-year period looking into what has been described, not by us, I have to say, but as the deer problem. And, almost all of those reports have suggested that deer populations need to be reduced. I mean, if you go back to 1989, the Red Deer Commission at the time, their chairman said we've had 30 years on and no improvement, with deer numbers over 300,000. So you can see we have moved on significantly in terms of deer populations even since then. And, I think there's no doubt now that there are major concerns that our deer population continues to increase. I mean, it's 1 million and increasing. And that firm and strong action is needed now if we are going to meet Scottish Government objectives for tackling both climate change and biodiversity loss and in the context of the nature and climate emergencies. So again, just a wee bit of further context which hasn't been mentioned yet is, of course, you know, we are in a heavily deforested country with 1 million deer and no natural predators. Even in 1947, Frank Fraser-Darling, in his authoritative book, The Natural History of the Highlands and Islands, described much of Western Scotland as a wet desert, and in the context of, you know, poor biodiversity, lack of woodland and so forth. Moving on to Abernethy Estate, RSPB's interest in this site really started in the 1950s, and the driver for our interest in that area at that time was the return of ospreys after a 50-year period of absence in Scotland. They became extinct in the 1800s, but returned to breed at what is now Lochgarten and close to the area where we have the Lochgarten Osprey Centre. You know, very early on, we took the decision at that point to work with the local community and to set up a protection scheme around those ospreys. Things have moved on considerably from there, and in 1988 we acquired the largest piece of land that is now part of what we call the RSPB Abernethy National Nature Reserve, and we've been expanding this site gradually with other purchases since then. And now the Abernethy National Nature Reserve is 14,400 hectares in extent. It's RSPB's second largest nature reserve after our site at Forestry in the Flow Country, which is roughly double the size of Abernethy in extent. The most important feature probably of the Abernethy site is that it is the largest Caledonian pinewood, original Caledonian pinewood fragment, has over 1% of this habitat. It has 2,000 hectares of what you could call old pinewood, so original pinewood, and there are 1,600 hectares of plantation. The site, when it was managed previously, under previous ownership, and during the World Wars, when there was a need for timber, some of the woodland area was removed and plantation was put in its place. We now have over 1,000 hectares of young and regenerating forest. The rest of the land at Abernethy is open moorland, and we go right up to the montane zone and over 4,000 feet at Ben Macdui, the highest montane site in Scotland. Abernethy has had over 5,000 species recorded. It's one of the most biodiverse sites in the UK, if not, and probably the most biodiverse site in Scotland. And as a result, it is designated, it has every designation going for it. Special area for conservation, special protection area under the EU Natura regulations. It's a site of special scientific interest under domestic nature protection legislation, and it's also a national nature reserve. So everything we do pretty well at Abernethy has to meet the legal requirements of those designations. So this is just a map very briefly of the Abernethy estate. You can see there that we pretty well surround the village of Nethy Bridge, the low ground going up to the high ground of the estate, and you can see the open moorland areas at the top. The red areas mark the areas of woodland expansion in particular. So yeah, and the most of the core original pinewood area is in the centre of the estate there, just immediately due south of Nethy Bridge. One of the key drivers for us being involved in Abernethy was, of course, to help protect the declining capercaillie population, and we have over 10% of the remaining capercaillie population on our land at Abernethy. So we have a real, imperative to manage for this species, as well as, the other important taxa that occur on this site. And as I say, it's not just about capercaillie at Abernethy. We have a range of other important taxa interests that we have to manage this site for as well. But Abernethy is probably the single most important site in Scotland now for capercaillie. Moving on to deer management, we have, just to give you some facts and figures, when we took on the estate in 1988, one of the first things that we did was carry out a deer assessment. We wanted to regenerate the forest, which was struggling, and lack of tree regeneration in particular. And from 1989, on average, 370 deer have been culled annually. The average cull of deer between 2019 and 2021 has increased to 600 per annum. Like others have described, our deer culling is informed by habitat impact assessments carried out by our reserves ecology team. And this isn't a uniform approach to deer management. We've adapted our approach over time. So initially, most of our culling took place in the upper forest and open ground focused on red deer. In 2007, we focused our culling more on the forest expansion zone. So this is the edge of the forest where it abuts the moorland area. And from 2012, we focused on planting broadleaf trees. So these necessarily had to be protected. Originally, when under previous management, a lot of the native broadleaf trees at Abernethy were removed. Birch and so forth were treated as weeds of no silvicultural interest, so were removed. So as part of creating greater diversity in the forest, we have tried to reinstate some of the broadleaf trees that should be present there, particularly birch and rowan. And from 2020, our objective has changed a bit further to reduce deer density across the whole of the site, and especially the remoter areas. So we've had access now and some increased stalking resource to actually get stalkers out to the very high tops and the remoter areas of the estate. I'll show you a graph in a minute, but similar numbers of roe and red deer are culled. We are increasing our effort on both species. So this graph just shows the number of deer that have been culled since the site purchase, with the black line, the total numbers of deer culled. The red line is the number of roe deer, and the number of, the red line is the number of roe deer, and the green line, the number of red deer. And you can see that over time, the numbers of roe deer that we've been culling in particular has been increasing. Sorry, roe deer, the green line, and red deer, the red line. So what are we seeking to achieve? Mainly we are looking to regenerate Caledonian pinewood. We have a 200-year vision for the site. We aim to get Caledonian pinewood restored over all suitable habitat, right up to the tree line, the natural tree line. With the deer management and other management that we've undertaken, the Caledonian pine has doubled in density every 11 years. We have at the present time less than 5 deer per square kilometre, and this has allowed the more palatable broadleaf tree species to increase. In some areas we've had to plant broadleaves, particularly where the seed source is poor, so that's mostly on the open moorland, and to protect those areas we need to carry out deer management, as was described by Iain earlier in relation to FLS work. And we expect the forest size by 2045 to be 4,861 hectares, which is about a third bigger than it presently is. I'll touch on this very briefly towards the end of my presentation now. What we are also have been doing for a few years now is working at a landscape scale. We recognise that, along with others, has been described in the Monadhliath and also at Caorann, To manage deer populations sustainably and to achieve a variety of other objectives, you need to work at a landscape scale. We have had an opportunity to work with partners through what's called the European Landscapes Partnership with our main 4 landowning neighbours, that is Wildland Limited, Forestry and Land Scotland and NatureScot, to deliver shared management objectives, especially pinewood restoration across this face of the Western Cairngorms. And, you know, a lot of that is being delivered through sustainable deer management. You've seen this map before. That's briefly a map of the Cairngorms Connect area, 60,000 hectares of contiguous land, going from 2,000 metres above sea level to 1,300 metres above sea level. Importantly, the 4 partners all have management control, including of deer management. And we think we're making significant progress, and the partnership at the moment is working well. There are always challenges, but you know, this is an exciting project. We have a lot of people coming to see our work here. We're not pretending we're doing anything new. Some of the work that we're doing here has been done by others very well as well. Craig Meggie, for example, we heard about Ben A earlier and the Gairloch work. But we are following that similar kind of approach. Over time, you would expect deer densities. I mean, currently we're reducing deer densities, not eliminating deer, importantly, but over time, you would expect that deer densities will probably rise as we create more suitable woodland habitat for them, and we need more deer browsing in the forest. So this isn't a steady state approach, and we will adapt our management over time. Okay, I think I'll probably leave it there, Nathan. Thank you for that opportunity. Happy to pick up any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, Duncan. The first question on this was from David Tulloch, asking how many deer do RSPB cull across their estates in Scotland?
Across our estates, I would have to come back to you on that. But we have quite a number of our sites where we do cull deer.
Okay, no problem. And Tom's asking where the figure of 1 million deer comes from for Scotland, and do you know how it's broken down between species?
So the 1 million deer figure comes from official NatureScot figures that have been published. So that is all out there. It's if you look in the Independent Deer Working Group report, that gives you how that figure has been arrived at and the breakdown between the various deer species. I mean, I would just mention, if you haven't read it already, I think the Independent Deer Working Group report is a very valuable contribution to this debate, and it sets out very clearly what now needs to be done to address, you know, deer populations, manage them sustainably. You know, we're not talking about deer reductions everywhere, but in many areas we need to reduce deer populations, and sometimes quite substantially. I think that's a key message here.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Claudia Bell. Now, I appreciate this is getting into fairly or potentially controversial subjects here, but that's okay. It's a more general question about how the presenters feel about introductions of wolves or lynx for controlling deer populations.
Do you want me to cover this?
By all means, Duncan, you can come in, but I'll open it to the other presenters afterwards as well if they want to share a view. They don't have to.
So I think the first thing to say is obviously both were native species. I think the prospect of lynx reintroduction is much more likely than wolf reintroduction, if we're being brutally honest here, but many will be aware that wolves are expanding their range across Western Europe. They even occur in places like the Netherlands these days. So, you know, if they're going to get here, it would need to be by human intervention, both species. And for both species, I mean, we strongly feel that, you know, we now have a national species reintroduction forum that would oversee any reintroductions and involve all stakeholders in that process. And we recognise that we certainly recognise that if you're going to reintroduce top predators like lynx and wolf, there will really need to be a very collaborative stakeholder process that's involved. And of course, you need big areas of land in which to do it, and collaboration between all of those landowners. So that would be my view on it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I don't know if any of the other presenters wanted to come in at this point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, so from our point of view, NatureScot's point of view, I think wolves, I think it's probably a distraction from restoring native habitats across the land. I think wolves is a really divisive issue for many landowners and occupiers. I think there's a huge amount of work for us to do in restoring landscapes without getting into that. Lynx, I would agree, is a much more likely, and I think we're probably expecting to get an application in the next 12 months on trialing that. But yeah, I think the key, as Duncan mentioned, is very close and collaboration and involvement with all the range of stakeholders who would have an interest in it. So that would be my thoughts.
From an FLS point of view, I'll give you a very political answer. No, any reintroduction of these species would be approved by the Scottish Government, and if Scottish Government went down that line, we'd support them in their decision. So sitting on the fence. No surprise.
Drew, yeah, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Duncan that there is a direction of travel that we are on here, and it's hard to see how, with all of the work that's been done, all of the preparatory work that's been done in lynx, it's hard to see how the arguments against its introduction are going to be challenged. I do think with wolves, it's a long way away yet before we get to that position. But I mean, given that you know we've seen beaver introductions, despite all of the difficulties that were involved in that, and the scheming that was going on to allow the introduction of beaver in Scotland, they're now there. And presumably the Scottish Government and the UK Government as well are not going to renege on that direction of travel. So I think it's inevitable that we will see lynx relatively soon. But I doubt if wolves are going to be with us, and certainly not bear for in any time soon.
I suppose it's just to add, I think, as I mentioned in my talk, I think it's finding the opportunities to have these discussions and debates in a really kind of open and safe space, and encouraging sort of informed debate, and hoping that things like this don't get played out over social media where it's just really the most extreme views are kind of heard. I think it's really important that everybody who's got a vested interest in this one way or another has the opportunity to contribute to the debate. And you've got to make sure that we've got our habitats and all the things that have been said before about collaboration and landscape scale are in place.
You're on mute, Nathan.
Sorry, I knew it was going to happen at some point today. Helen Ferguson's taken the discussion in a slightly different direction and is asking a question about the ethics and morality of deer culls. So she says, in Germany and other European countries, there is a moral and ethical code of conduct. No parent animal may be hunted during periods of reproduction or the raising of young. that would be considered an offence. So why should Scotland be any different? Now, and I'm not expecting that to be solely Duncan to answer that, but I don't know if any of the presenters want to come in on that. Possibly.
I can just cover the RSPB angle on this. So yeah,
okay,
we do apply for out of season deer controls, but we also apply, which may not be widely known, the RSPB also has a council vertebrate control policy, which we apply, and our work is informed by an ethics committee. So we apply the highest of welfare standards in any management of species that we carry out. We also publish all the statistics around the numbers of deer and other animals that we kill on our land each year. So we try and do this in as open and transparent way as possible. So that information is all publicly available, in contrast to some other information. For example, from many private estates don't publish that kind of information. I know FLS are moving firmly in that direction, which is very welcome through the Deer Dashboard type approach. And yeah, I mean, we have nothing to hide here. We will do this in an open and transparent way. I should say we also consult on all of our management plans for our sites, which includes our deer management with the local communities and other interests, our neighbours that surround our sites. So that is a formal policy of ours, working through the Scottish Land Commission type guidance.
No, just to follow on for Forestry and Land Scotland, as you saw in our presentation, though, we do make the most use of authorisations when we can, and that with it, and we will continue to do so into the future. But when doing so, we'll comply with the terms and conditions of any authorisation and best practice. No, that's there, so we'll operate within the legal environments of what we're allowed to do.
Just to say that very early in my career, I was involved in developing the best practice guidance series, and I think it should be reassuring for people to know that deer welfare runs absolutely through the heart of everything that we do in deer management and should do, and that's certainly at the heart of all the guidance that's available. You know, and again, it's just to re-emphasise the point moving forward. We need a really skilled, knowledgeable, professional workforce, which we have. But making sure that we've got the highest standards of training and skills as well.
Sure. Sinclair, do you want to come in?
Yeah, well, I think the existing seasons have been there for a very long time. We provide licenses for killing out with the seasons, but excluding April to September for females for obvious reasons. If we're young or physically dependent on their mother, then if culling out a season, then it's a requirement that the juvenile is removed first, so that there's not going to be a welfare issue for that dependent. Seasons are within the Deer Working Group report, and that will be subject to consultation. So the range of views that are the wide range of views that are out there will be considered. So I'm not suggesting that we go a German route or any other route, but it'll be informed by the consultation process.
Okay, thank you. There's some ongoing discussion in the chat thread about links and predation and prey and predators and potential impacts to deer numbers. And yeah, David Tulloch came in with a question without getting into a larger debate: is deer a problem or a commodity? Now, I know George has answered this, and I would agree that it's both. I suppose high deer numbers are a problem, but deer in itself is also a commodity. So it's again, it's not getting too polarized in this. It's one or the other, and it's this or it's that. It can be a lot of different things. Are there any other questions before we close this meeting, close this seminar?
Hello, could I have a word?
Yes, sorry, yes, is that Alan?
It's regarding a question I put earlier to Duncan. The RSPB have owned Abernethy for 33 years. Since they took ownership of it, they have had out-of-season licences and night shooting licences for those 30-odd years. And they're still doing it 24/7. They've got guys between themselves and Cairngorm Connect out shooting deer in or out of season. That's happening just now. It's been happening for years, 30-odd years in Abernethy Reserve. And I can personally witness that, having stayed here for a lot longer than they've owned the place. And it's an absolute disgrace that they're taking this long to manage their population of deer to what they want. It's a disgrace. And the Scottish Government are backing them up by giving them licences to carry out these culls every year. Why is no one talking about that? Is that the elephant in the room that nobody wants to address? It's a disgrace. And anyone to do with deer management or health of population of deer should hang their heads in shame. Because it's nonsense, utter nonsense. I'll leave it at that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It bugs me. It's a big thing for me. And the way that it's been done just now is absolutely disgraceful. The deer are as much a part of our heritage as any plant or tree living out there. And to be treated like vermin as they are now by the RSPB and various other organisations is absolutely shocking. And the Scottish Government are backing them up. Backing them up.
Okay, Alan, thank you. I think you've made a point. I don't know, Duncan, if you wanted to answer any of the points there.
Well, very briefly, as Linzi said, deer welfare is at the heart of deer management, and that's explicit. And also, just referring to what Iain mentioned earlier, what we do at Abernethy is entirely within the the system as set out, the authorisation system that has been set out by NatureScot, which was recently reviewed, I have to say. And has been kept in place. So, there've been a few minor changes to it, but broadly as previously. So it has been substantially reviewed to make sure it's consistent with best practice information. And, we work within the system. All the work that we do is authorised by NatureScot under the authorisations procedure. Generally, most of our deer are killed within season, though.
Okay, well, on that note, I will bring this to a close. Thank you very much to all our presenters. Very interesting, some good lively discussion. And yeah, Caroline will be compiling a list of the questions. So